Hello everyone, and welcome again to our Pro-Revenge. In today's Reddit HOA narrative, I was sued by a homeowners association for residing in an off-grid lake cabin without paying their dues. Let's jump right into the story, which begins like this. A few years ago, I was residing in a restrictive city apartment. While I held a respectable IT job, I was feeling completely drained. I've always been a person who values solitude and the outdoors, and I had been fantasizing about acquiring a piece of land where I could one day construct a small, self-sufficient home and get away from the constant noise. My intention wasn't to relocate permanently right away. I simply desired a place to visit on weekends, perhaps work remotely from time to time, and eventually make a full-time move once everything was in order. I dedicated months to browsing online listings, visiting rural lots, and investigating foreclosures and auctions. The majority of the properties were either far beyond my financial reach or total ruins situated in the middle of nowhere, lacking any access to a lake or water. But then, one day, I happened upon a listing for an old cabin by a lake. The pictures were dreadful, obviously captured years prior, and the description was ambiguous. It mentioned the property had been deserted for more than a decade. The cabin itself was in poor condition, but it was located on approximately 3 acres with direct frontage on a private lake of a decent size. The asking price felt unbelievably low, which instantly aroused my suspicion, but I reached out to the real estate agent regardless. As it happened, the property had been stuck in a legal limbo for many years after its original owner died without any identifiable inheritors. The county had eventually seized it for delinquent taxes and was now selling it in its current condition. The agent forewarned me that the cabin was essentially unlivable and would require extensive renovation, but the land was stable and the lake was stunning. I took a drive to check it out on a Saturday morning. The property was situated at the very end of a long gravel road, hidden away in the forest. As I drove up, I understood why it had been left to decay. The cabin was a wreck, the roof was partially collapsed, the windows were shattered, and the porch was decaying. However, the moment I walked around to the back and laid eyes on the lake, I was completely won over. It was magnificent. Roughly 40 acres of clear water, encircled by trees, and utterly serene. The property included about 200 feet of direct lakefront. What really drew my attention, however, was the absence of any other houses on the lake. I surveyed the perimeter of the potential property and could make out a development to the east, maybe a quarter of a mile away through the trees. It appeared to be a more recent subdivision, likely constructed in the last 15 years, with identical-looking houses all in a row. But they were not situated on the lake, they were positioned back from the shoreline. I didn't give it much thought at the time. I submitted an offer that very week, significantly under the asking price, since the cabin was basically worthless and I was primarily purchasing the land. It was quite literally abandoned, and the county accepted my offer without hesitation. I completed all the title research, commissioned a survey, and verified that everything was legally sound. The property had never been associated with any HOA and had no easements or deed restrictions. It was simply an independent parcel that was located near a subdivision. It was ideal. I closed on the property about 2 months later and began formulating my plans. The cabin was too deteriorated to be salvaged, so I had it torn down and the debris removed. My vision was to eventually erect a small, modern cabin with solar panels, a well for water, a septic system, the complete off-grid package. But achieving that would require both time and money. So, for the initial few months, I concentrated on clearing the land, having it graded, and installing a gravel pad where I could park my truck and place a large, used camping trailer I had purchased. The trailer wasn't luxurious, but it was adequate for a weekend getaway. I used a generator for electricity, brought in water in jugs, and utilized a camping toilet system. It was primitive, but that was precisely what I was looking for. I began spending every weekend there, and on some weeks, I would work from the property remotely if the weather was pleasant. Life was wonderful, and that's when the HOA chose to reveal its presence. Approximately 3 months after I purchased the property, I was out there on a Saturday afternoon, sitting by the lake, sipping a beer, and relishing the quiet when I heard a shout. I spun around to see a woman striding down from the road toward my trailer. She was attired as if she were heading to a tennis match at a country club, and she wore a sour expression, as if she'd encountered a foul odor. She bypassed any introduction and immediately went on the offensive. "Excuse me, you cannot be here. This is private property." I rose to my feet, bewildered. "Yes, it is. It's my property." She seemed momentarily surprised before regaining her composure. "No, this entire vicinity is under the jurisdiction of the HOA. You must depart immediately, or I will contact the sheriff." I couldn't help but laugh, assuming she was making a joke. I am the owner of this land. I acquired it several months ago. I possess the deed and all the necessary documents. This has never been affiliated with any HOA. Her face flushed with anger. "That is impossible. Every property surrounding the lake is part of our association. We have rules and regulations. You can't simply camp here like a vagrant. This impacts all of our property values." My patience was wearing thin, and I responded, "Look, I'm not sure what to tell you, but this is my land. I am not, and have never been, a member of your HOA. I have all the documentation to back that up. Now, if you'll excuse me, you are trespassing on my property." She actually sputtered at that. "Trespassing? How dare you? I am the HOA president, and we will be discussing this further. You'll be hearing from us." She pivoted and marched back up toward the road. I just shook my head and returned to my beer, assuming that was the last I'd hear of it, just some meddlesome HOA president who didn't comprehend property lines. I was mistaken, though. That was only the start. The following weekend when I returned, a certified letter was waiting for me. It was from the HOA, addressed to their current occupant, at my lake property's address. The letter stated that I was in breach of numerous HOA rules, such as having an unauthorized structure, my trailer, failing to maintain approved landscaping, neglecting to register with the HOA, and not paying HOA dues. It insisted that I remove the trailer at once, register with the HOA, and remit 6 months of back dues along with late fees, amounting to nearly $3,000. I contacted my real estate lawyer, the same one who had managed my closing. I laid out the situation and sent him a copy of the letter. He went over all my title documents and phoned me back the next day. "You are entirely in the right," he stated. "Your land was never included in the HOA. It existed for decades before the subdivision was even built. They have absolutely no legal claim to your property. Do not reply to their letter. If they reach out to you again, direct them to me." So, I did just that. I sent a concise letter back to the HOA, with a copy to my attorney, declaring that my property was not part of their association, never had been, and I would not be adhering to any of their demands. I believed that would resolve the matter, but the harassment began about 2 weeks later. I arrived at the property one Friday evening to discover a notice fastened to a tree near my trailer. It was a violation warning, alleging that I was in violation of HOA landscaping requirements and had 15 days to rectify the issue or be fined. I tore it off and discarded it. The next morning, I was awakened by someone banging on my trailer door at 7 a.m. This time, it was a different individual, a man in his 50s sporting cargo shorts and a polo shirt. He identified himself as the HOA vice president. "We need to discuss your situation here," he said. "There is no situation," I retorted. "I am not a member of your HOA. My lawyer has already sent you a letter clarifying this." "Look, buddy," he said, his tone becoming more hostile, "I don't know what you're trying to pull, but this isn't going to work. We have over 60 homes in this HOA, and we all pay our fees. We all abide by the rules. You can't just set up camp here and do as you please." "I'm not setting up camp. I own this land, and it is not affiliated with your HOA. That's not what our records indicate. According to our files, all land adjacent to the lake is part of the association, and that includes your plot." I was growing weary of this exchange. "Then your records are incorrect. Verify it with the county. Examine the title history. This land was never a part of your development. At that, he got directly in my face. Listen to me very carefully. We have rules for a purpose. This community has standards. We will not allow some piece of trash to move in and transform the lake into a garbage dump. You will either join the HOA, pay your dues, and adhere to our rules, or we will make your life a living hell until you're gone. I took a step back. Leave my property immediately. He grinned. Or else what? You'll call the police? Be my guest. We contribute to the sheriff's election fund every year. Best of luck with that. He turned and walked away, and I promptly called my lawyer again. I purchased a pair of trail cameras and positioned them around the property, aimed toward the road and the subdivision. I began maintaining a meticulous log of every conversation, every letter, and every notice. It was a good thing I did, because the situation deteriorated. Over the subsequent months, the HOA intensified its harassment. I would find violation notices attached to trees on an almost weekly basis. They mailed me letters demanding my presence at HOA meetings to address my compliance issues. They even asserted that I owed them thousands of dollars in dues and late fees. One letter went so far as to demand that I grant them an easement to my lakefront property so HOA members could reach the water, arguing it was for the community's benefit. That final demand truly revealed their motives. You see, after doing some digging, I discovered that when Lakeside Estates was first built, the developers had intended to provide lake access as a feature. However, they had never managed to secure the rights to the lake. The developer had seemingly presumed they could purchase the remaining lakefront lots, including mine, at a later date, but then declared bankruptcy before that could occur. Consequently, these HOA members had bought homes in a lakefront community but lacked any actual access to the lake. They could view the water from their properties but couldn't get to it because my land and a few other parcels stood in their way. They wanted my property, plain and simple, and they believed they could intimidate me into surrendering it. I rejected every demand, every request, and every letter, and I copied my attorney on all my replies. The harassment simply persisted. They reported me to code enforcement, alleging I was operating an illicit campground. An inspector came, surveyed the area, and informed me that everything was in order, provided I wasn't renting out the property or conducting a business. They contacted the health department, claiming I had an unlawful septic system. An inspector visited and confirmed I was using a legitimate camping sanitation system. They even called the sheriff, asserting that I was a suspicious and possibly dangerous individual. The deputy who came was actually quite reasonable and advised me to call if the HOA continued to trouble me. But the most egregious part was when they began entering my property without consent. I would check my trail camera footage and see HOA board members wandering around, taking pictures, and measuring things. On one occasion, I even recorded 3 of them prying open my trailer door and peering inside. That was the point when I called the sheriff myself and lodged a trespassing complaint against them. The deputy who responded this time was different from the first. And he appeared to be on much friendlier terms with the HOA president when she arrived. He essentially dismissed it as a civil dispute and recommended we work it out like neighbors. I highlighted that they had broken into my trailer, which was clearly criminal trespassing and breaking and entering. However, he stated that without evidence of damage or theft, he wouldn't be arresting anyone and that I should think about being more cooperative with the community. I subsequently filed a formal complaint with the sheriff's office, but it led to nothing. This continued for nearly 2 years. Incessant letters, endless violation notices, constant threats. They levied over $50,000 in fines against me for various fabricated violations, though I obviously never paid a dime since I wasn't in their HOA. They placed liens on my property with the county, which my lawyer had to contest to have removed, costing me legal fees. They even appeared on my property unannounced on dozens of occasions. They posted on local social media pages, portraying me as a dangerous squatter. They contacted my workplace in an attempt to get me terminated, claiming I was conducting some sort of illegal business. Throughout all this, I meticulously documented everything, every letter, every email, every conversation, every trespassing event caught on camera, and every false report made to the authorities. My lawyer repeatedly assured me we had a solid case for harassment but advised waiting to see if they would cease their actions. They did not. They intensified their efforts. Roughly 2.5 years after I acquired the property, I was served with legal papers. The HOA was suing me for more than $100,000. The complaint was extensive, filled with legal jargon, but the core allegations were clear. They asserted that I had diminished the value of their neighborhood by not keeping my property up to their standards, that I owed years of unpaid HOA dues, that my refusal to join the HOA constituted a violation of local ordinances, and that I was required to grant them lake access as a public accommodation. It was utterly absurd, but it was also a reality I had to face. I consulted with my attorney, and we began to prepare our defense. However, he also proposed another course of action, a countersuit. We could pursue legal action against them for harassment, trespassing, defamation, abuse of process, and several other offenses. The evidence I had gathered over 2 years would be crushing. He predicted that we could likely secure a settlement very quickly once they saw the evidence we possessed. But I wasn't interested in a settlement. I wanted to decimate them. We submitted our response, refuting all of their allegations, and concurrently filed a comprehensive countersuit. We enclosed copies of my title documents, which proved the property was never part of the HOA, and the survey that clearly defined the property lines. We also attached every single piece of evidence of their harassment, letters, emails, photos, and videos, including the trail camera footage showing them trespassing. We included records of their false reports to authorities, screenshots of their social media posts, proof of them contacting my employer, documentation of the fraudulent liens they filed, and copies of their threatening letters demanding I surrender my land. It was a veritable mountain of evidence, all methodically organized and recorded. My attorney commented that it was some of the most thorough record-keeping he had ever seen from a client. The HOA's lawyer contacted us about a week after we filed our countersuit, proposing mediation. My attorney informed them we would entertain the idea if they dropped their lawsuit and covered my legal expenses, but they declined. The discovery phase was an absolute treasure trove. We issued subpoenas for all of the HOA's records and documents. What we uncovered was even more shocking than I had imagined. It appeared the HOA board had been misappropriating funds for years. They had persuaded the residents of the need to establish a legal defense fund to address problem properties like mine and had amassed over $200,000 in special assessments from the homeowners. However, the majority of that money had been used for personal expenditures, luxury purchases, and favorable contracts with businesses owned by the board members' relatives. Even more damning, the documents revealed that the board had explicitly strategized to force me out so they could obtain my property for a fraction of its value and then sell access rights to the lake as a premium amenity to boost property values. They had literally orchestrated the entire campaign of harassment as a tactic to make me capitulate. We also discovered emails between board members where they discussed the fabricated violations, joked about how they were going to make this guy's life hell, and coordinated their false reports to the authorities. One email from the HOA president explicitly stated, "He's not part of the HOA, but he doesn't realize we can't actually enforce anything. Just keep sending notices and fines. Eventually, he'll either pay up or leave." My attorney was practically gleeful as he reviewed all this. "They've given us everything we need," he said. "This is going to be a slaughter." The case proceeded to trial about 8 months later. The HOA representatives arrived with their lawyer and several board members, all attired in business professional wear and presenting their most concerned citizen expressions. I appeared with my lawyer and boxes filled with evidence. Their attorney contended that my property was somehow implicitly a part of the HOA due to its proximity to the subdivision and its border with the lake. He asserted that I had caused a drop in property values by neglecting to maintain my land according to community standards. He called a real estate agent to the stand who testified that properties in the vicinity had experienced below-average appreciation, although during cross-examination, she conceded she had no way of proving my property was the cause. And yes, folks, I suspect it had more to do with the HOA's outrageous behavior. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe the OP was the reason for the decline in property values? And while you're there, please remember to subscribe to the channel and like the video if you haven't done so yet. In any case, when it was our turn, my attorney systematically dismantled their case. He presented the title history, demonstrating that my property had never been associated with the HOA or any preceding development. He also displayed the original development blueprints for the HOA, which explicitly excluded my parcel. He brought forward testimony from the county surveyor, who confirmed the property boundaries and the distinct legal standing of my land. He then transitioned to the claims in our countersuit. He showed the judge the emails in which the HOA board detailed their scheme to harass me into leaving. He played the video footage from my trail cameras that depicted them trespassing on my property, breaking into my trailer, and taking photos without my consent. He provided evidence of every single false report they had made to the authorities, every menacing letter, and every fraudulent lien they had filed. The HOA board members fidgeted uncomfortably in their seats as each piece of evidence was introduced. Their lawyer repeatedly attempted to object, but the judge overruled him on nearly every occasion. And then came the financial evidence. My attorney presented the HOA's own financial records, which showed they had collected over $200,000 from residents for a legal defense fund but had only allocated about $30,000 to actual legal expenses related to my case. He produced receipts and credit card statements proving the board had utilized HOA funds to finance vacations, lavish dinners, home improvements, and other personal expenses. The judge's expression grew increasingly grim as the evidence mounted. At one point, he halted the proceedings and directly asked the HOA board members if they had any response. The HOA president attempted to dismiss it all as a misunderstanding, claiming they had acted in good faith to safeguard the community. The judge, however, did not appear persuaded. The trial spanned 3 days, and in the end, the judge required very little time for deliberation. He ruled that the HOA's lawsuit was entirely baseless. My property had never been a part of their association, they held no jurisdiction over my land, and their claims were frivolous. He dismissed their case with prejudice, preventing them from refiling. Then, he addressed our countersuit. He ruled in our favor on every single claim: harassment, trespassing, defamation, abuse of process, filing false liens, and several others. He granted me actual damages to cover my legal costs and the time I lost contending with their harassment. He awarded me punitive damages for their deliberate and malicious behavior. And he mandated that they cover my attorney's fees, which had become substantial by that point. In total, the judgment amounted to just over $400,000. But that wasn't even the most satisfying part. The judge also issued a special finding that the HOA board had violated their fiduciary responsibility to the HOA members by embezzling funds and using the association to carry out a personal vendetta. He mandated a forensic audit of the HOA's finances and forwarded the case to the district attorney for possible criminal charges. Within a week, the local newspaper ran the story. Local HOA board sued neighbor over property they didn't control, ordered to pay $400,000. The article covered the harassment, the embezzlement, and all the details. The HOA president, vice president, and 2 other board members were all compelled to resign. The homeowners in the HOA convened an emergency meeting and voted to remove the entire board. A new board was chosen with the task of cleaning up the mess and retrieving the misappropriated funds. The district attorney did indeed press criminal charges against the former board members. I'm not privy to all the specifics, as I wasn't directly involved, but I learned that 3 of them accepted plea agreements and were required to pay restitution. The former president contested the charges but was ultimately found guilty of embezzlement and fraud. The last I heard, she received a few years in prison and a significant fine. The HOA itself was forced to declare bankruptcy as they were unable to pay the judgment. The homeowners had to authorize a special assessment just to pay for the bankruptcy filing and escape the debt. A few of them even reached out to me to apologize for the board's actions, which I found considerate. I assured them I held no ill will toward the regular homeowners, only toward the board members who had singled me out. As for myself, I eventually received most of the judgment. The HOA's insurance covered a portion, and I managed to get some of the recovered embezzled funds. I didn't receive the entire $400,000, but I got enough to cover all my legal expenses and have a surplus. With that money, I was finally able to construct my ideal cabin on the property. And the next one is another wonderfully satisfying story, titled "The Elite Got a Taste of Their Own Medicine." Back in 2018, I married my now ex-husband. He hailed from a wealthy family and was raised in the upper echelons of society. He never wanted for anything, whereas I am his complete opposite. I grew up in extreme poverty and learned at a very young age that one must work hard and rely on oneself. We met at his uncle's restaurant where I was employed as a server. He came in one day for a meal, and I waited on his table. He requested my phone number, and we immediately connected. Or so I believed. After our wedding, however, his true nature quickly emerged. In essence, he was a total narcissist, an actual diagnosed one. This story occurs when I met his sister and her boyfriend for the first time. We collected them from the airport, and as he was making introductions, she said excitedly, "Oh my God, she's totally Jordan's." Her boyfriend concurred, and my husband laughed. I asked, "What is Jordan's?" My husband explained that it meant I had excellent style. I thanked her for the compliment and didn't think any more of it. Over the course of their visit, they began calling me Jordan's, and I took it as an endearing nickname. I thought, great, they approve of me. That was, until one evening when we all decided to get intoxicated. We opened some wine. And as our consumption increased, they started remarking on how poor and cheap my wine was. I sort of brushed it off as they moved on to playing foolish drinking games. Truth or Dare was one of them. My husband's sister dared him to reveal to me the meaning of Jordan's. They were all cackling like hens and completely inebriated. He then explained, "Jordan's is the name we give homeless individuals who have a sense of style." By this point, I was utterly stunned while they all erupted in another wave of laughter. I was not as drunk as the others and just sat there, struggling to hold back tears. Fast forward to the following day. I confronted my hungover husband, asking what their problem was. He had completely forgotten that he had told me and started insisting it was just a joke and I shouldn't take it so seriously. I didn't drop the subject, however, and continued to push him on it. He eventually confessed, "I might have mentioned your upbringing and how you're not like us." Just to prepare them. I was in utter shock. To prepare them for me. I couldn't process what I was hearing. I spent the next few days keeping to myself, finding excuses to stay busy. My husband had purchased a pricey bottle of tequila that we were meant to drink the night before they departed. The day before their last, though, they went for a hike, which I made an excuse to skip. Time for some payback, everyone. Let's put your elite palates to the test. So, I recorded a video of myself replacing the expensive bottle of tequila with Sauser Gold. In the video, I relaxed and took shots of the pricey tequila while speaking about my childhood, the love and bond one share with my family, and how lucky I was to have grown up without becoming a disgusting, snobbish piece of trash like the family I married into. I mean, I really let loose. I got drunk and was asleep by the time they returned, so I didn't have to interact with them, and they were unaware that I was intoxicated from $200 worth of tequila. On their final night, I observed these fools sipping the cheap tequila as if it were fine wine, remarking on how distinguished and delicate it was. They noted that you could taste the quality. I sat there, savoring every word that came from their mouths. I then stood up, connected my phone to the television, and announced, "I've put something together for you all to thank you for your visit." I pressed play and watched as the realization of what had occurred and what they were drinking dawned on them. Satisfied, I began to clear the shot glasses from the table as the sound of complete silence filled the room. They said absolutely nothing to me. I went to bed, only to be woken by my husband in a rage, informing me that his sister was crying because I had humiliated them. To which I simply replied, "Yeah, it stinks, doesn't it?" They departed the next day and never spoke to me again. Even when we visited their parents, they all reside in Europe, she declined to come and see us. It's safe to say, I'm now happily divorced. And the next one is a petty revenge story, and it is titled, "Worked Out Even Nicer Than I Thought." So I reside 100 meters from a school, and normally, I am perfectly fine with that. No issues at all. What really infuriates me, though, is when school lets out. Grandparents or regular parents occasionally park in front of my driveway. So, I arrive home from work, and there's someone parked, still in their car, blocking the driveway. At this point, I am exhausted, have had a rough day, and am generally fed up with this kind of nonsense. So, I signal to the driver to please move. He gives me the typical, "It's just for 5 minutes to pick up the kids" excuse. In response, I turned off my car, effectively obstructing the whole street. People began to honk until the traffic officer who manages traffic at the start and end of the school day came over. He inquired why I was stopped, and I replied, "Oh, it's nothing major. That gentleman is just blocking my driveway for 5 minutes to pick up his kids." The officer approached the other driver and ultimately issued him a ticket. I would have been content with him simply moving his car, but this outcome was far better. And yes, guys, thank you for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you again.